ahead and get started talking, David. How's your writing going? You've been writing a couple of books.
Well, yeah, the book that I just have finished the original manuscript on was the collection of my whole life's work of science, basically. It was a massive, massive fusion of information to the point that the references section at the end is like 45 single-spaced pages long of actual notes that link back to real, hard scientific data. So there's really nothing I've ever done that was ambitious as this, and probably never will again, because it's literally a summation of everything I've spent my whole life putting together. And I'll worry about how to make the other books amazing after that, but in the future, whatever research I do is going to be a lot easier than this was. This was truly a gargantuan effort to accomplish.
Wow, that sounds awesome. And what is your release date projected for this masterpiece?
Well, I was hoping that it would be out this year, but once I finish my part, then everybody else has to do their jobs, and that takes about 5 months. So it's looking like it's going to be April or May next year before it comes out.
Awesome. And I have really good news now. We are actually being heard from the main stage now at Raw Spirit Festival. So if you would love to address the people at Raw Spirit Festival, just give them a big shout out and we'll shout that out back at you.
87 years ago, this great nation was founded.
Oh my gosh.
In 2012, vote for me.
What are you going to be running for?
President of the universe.
President of the universe. Very good. Well, universe needs the president, no doubt.
Indeed.
Well, I've been enjoying your blogs a lot lately, David, and it feels like you have a message that is very potent, and also I feel we all really need to hear it right now because there's so much confusion on the planet with different systems crumbling, not knowing kind of what's going on behind the scene with what I call our wayward siblings sort of wreaking havoc in many arenas. And your message is really powerful about how we should orient ourselves to this shift time. Can you share with the Raw Spirit Festival crowd and Visionary Culture Radio fans what you think is important for us to know at this time?
Well, I've heard the quote said that it's easier for a person to change their religion than it is to change their diet. And I went through very elaborate modifications of my path based on this celestial contact that came through for me. This, of course, is very controversial for people who haven't experienced it, but the core of healthy diet, as I understand it, lies in the fact that we are a multidimensional identity. And that means that you do have a physical body. Yes, that's true. But there is also an energetic duplicate to your physical body. And to even say an energetic duplicate is kind of a misnomer because there's multiple energetic components to your body, each of which have their own domains that they're working in. Now, it is true that as you go farther and farther from the physical body, those energetic pairs that you have, those soul fragments that you have, or soul aspects, do not require so much energy from the physical, but the closer you get to the physical, the more these energetic aspects of your personality are heavily reliant upon your participation in order to determine their level of energy, which in turn determines how well they can help you from the other side. So you can have, similar to conventionally grown produce, you look at the so-called nitrogen potassium phosphorus ratio, the NPK, or it's nitrogen sodium phosphorus, I believe it is. But anyway, you look at like Miracle Grow and it says 15-30-15 NPK ratio, And that means that, yes, technically you can get plants to grow and they're going to look big if you only give them these 3 nutrients. They're going to look like they're having a miracle growth, but you're losing all this other stuff, and that will affect the nutrient profile of the food. So when you're getting into a dietary practice, what I have found out from research as well as from guidance is that you really have to feed your energy body as well as your physical body. And the energy body is this part of ourselves that truly does determine how intuitive we are, how much of the synchronicity and mystical experience we're having in our lives. And so I get people who are basically on the SAD, standard American diet, and they're wondering why they're not having more of the kinds of things that I'm writing about on my website. And it's like, well, you know, it starts with technique. And the
Might be a
technique,
little clogged up in there.
yeah, the technique involves, ultimately, if you want to get to the technical side of it, what we're dealing with is, this is some of the latest breakthroughs in research that I made in my book. We have a parallel reality that we're coexisting with all the time. As everybody looks around right now, you can see the reality that's around you. It's all physical. It's based on matter. But there is a pair to all that matter that exists in the same spot. It's literally in the same location. And all that matter has a parallel reality where it exists in this other plane. The difference is that the entire universe is not the 3 dimensions that we see. The 3 dimensions that we can see and measure as 3 dimensions is actually an illusion. And it's coexisting with another 3-dimensional reality where all the laws of space and time are completely inverted. It's a reciprocal relationship, which is why the physics is called reciprocal system. So what that means is there's 3 real dimensions in the universe. And in those 3 real dimensions, you have these 2 apparently different planes in which matter and energy is constantly flowing in between them from one to the other, back and forth, back and forth. But we only have access in our physical body through any direct seeing, touching, tasting, smelling. We only have access to one of these 2 realities. But on the quantum level, atoms and molecules are constantly phasing in between these 2 realities. They do this by what's called the wave-particle duality. What you're seeing as a particle becomes a wave when it goes over into this other reality. And again, the dividing line between this reality and the other one is that time over there is 3-dimensional to us. So that
is that why it
that,
feels so real here sometimes?
well,
like if this is an illusion, it's a good illusion.
it's a compelling illusion, that's true, but it doesn't mean that that's all there is. It's much more correct to say that when you postulate 3-dimensional time, you now have a working model to explain things like premonitions, Nostradamus' prophecies of the future, all kinds of ancient indigenous prophecies that came true. You know, the giant rock, which split, and it said that the prophecy said that when it splits, that it means that this transformational time is coming. So in order to understand this energy flow between these 2 parallel realities, and I'm really dramatically simplifying it right now, but there is a fluid-like vibration that determines how atoms and molecules are phasing from wave to particle. And when they're in a wave state, they're literally spaced out in time. They exist in the past, they exist in the present, they exist in the future simultaneously. That's why they look like a wave, because they're not consolidated into our space. So there is a whole level of reality where all the atoms and molecules that we see are in their wave state. And over there, they're in particle state because they're not they're not spread out anymore. So what I'm saying is that this fluid-like flow from this parallel reality determines your level of consciousness, your level of health, and you want to be able to be more wave-like so that you're not just consolidated into particles. In order to get to that wave-like state where you actually have more interface happening with the parallel reality, the key is to have a vibrational connection to that parallel reality. In order to establish a vibrational connection, one of the best tools we have is sound. Another great tool is color, meaning you want to go out there and get full spectrum light. You don't want to have sunscreen on your skin. The only reason why people get skin cancer and sunburn is because they have a terrible diet. That's another major, major myth that we have, is that, like, the sun is bad for you. It's bad for you if you have the wrong food, but not if you're eating a healthy diet. So you don't burn anywhere near as much, and you're not going to have the skin problems. So the color, the light is very important. The sound is also, of course, important. But then you get down to the actual geometry. The geometry is the vibrational crystal that forms when you see these vibrations expressed as something that you can physically see. The geometry can be found in the healthiest food by what's known as microclusters. This is something that really captivates people in the health community, because the healthiest types of food, the types of food that you're serving at this festival and that you're talking about, are the most microclustered you can have. And what that means is, if you take little atoms and shoot them through a nozzle where it's one atom at a time, normally we'd think that they just turn into a loose pile and they wouldn't do anything interesting. That's not what happens. There's a mysterious force, which again is the result of this wave-like interface between these two realities. And this mysterious force will consolidate those little atoms into these geometric patterns, because the geometry is the vibration formed into a crystal. It's actually how the vibration looks in three-dimensional space. So the trick is that in order to feed your energy body, you need to have food that has the most amount of microclustering in it. Conventionally grown produce has literally been stripped of almost all of its microclusters. And then there's these mysterious things that mainstream science doesn't seem to understand. For example, why is it that when people eat a lot of sugar all at once, that for about 5 hours your immune system shuts down? That's been documented, but it's not understood. Now, this is, again, another reason for why you want to have a healthier diet, because the sugar absorbs these energy fields. And so the energy fields are related to how you can be healthy. And when you're absorbing them by eating too much sugar, you're actually shutting down your body's ability to reach these higher levels of consciousness. So early in my work with doing readings and dreams, I figured out very easily that when I ate sweet stuff, I had a much harder time remembering my dream the next morning, as opposed to the mornings after I had not eaten anything sweet. When you're dealing with fruit sugars and things like that, it's okay, but you still want to be in moderation. I've heard that some people can go on a total fruitarian diet and be okay, but in order to do that, you got to totally clean the decks of all candida yeast and all that kind of stuff in your system first. And you have to really optimize your body to be able to handle that kind of a diet. But
I have my friend Robert, he's now called Jericho Sunfire. He's actually gone on to breatharianism now in a physical body, and he's working out. But he went from, regular fat diet to vegan to raw to fruitarian before he attempted to go to all liquid and then no food, just living on the ethers, or like you said, these higher vibrations. Not that everybody's going to do that, obviously, but
look, there a lot of channeling is totally bogus, but not all of it is. And there are some sources that have given some very, very reliable data that could be checked out scientifically in great detail. I'm speaking about the Law of One series, which was in the early 1980s. Seems to be one of the most, if not the most, authentic connection from ETs we've ever gotten. And one of many things that was said in there is that the state that we have in these higher realms is a state where we live on pure energy. So that's what we're evolving into.
That would make sense.
I can hear some people cheering or laughing in the background, but it's totally for real. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. We are literally being pushed through a galactically triggered evolution in which we are becoming more of what we already are in the greatest cosmic sense. We are the one infinite creator.
That? Yeah.
The only thing that really exists in the universe is identity, and it's a single identity. And all of the other perceptions that we have are considered to be distortions, because once we divide, we're separating ourselves from the core. And so the entire universe is a division. So ultimately, all the galaxies, all the stars, all the planets, and all the people on all the planets are really just a funhouse mirror reflection of one identity that's been crystallized into apparent infinity.
I love the way that you just described that, what we all are starting to know at this phase of the shift cycle that we're in.
Well, it's something that you can find out for yourself. And I try to always encourage people to not take my word for this stuff. Do not accept that I am an authority. Do not accept that I know anything. Because if you go in and you do your own practices and you optimize your diet, you can find out for yourself what pure awareness feels like, what it involves. It will be called you'll get what they call a bliss hit, and that's a good thing. And honestly, there's a lot of really good scientific research I go into in my book that shows that when you have groups of people gathered together whose intention is focused, there is a collective effect where that group energy actually substantially increases your capacity for vibrational healing and ascension. So when you look at
that's what we're doing here.
When you look at these sites all around the world, like the amazing sites in Peru, like Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman, and when you look at sites like Karnak in Brittany, France, where there's like 3,000 stones all lined up in these circles and in rows, and then you have Stonehenge and you have Avebury, and all over the world you see these sacred sites where stones are aligned. And again, the real trick here is that there is a spin field in gravity. Gravity is the key. Gravity is the source of life. Gravity is the energy flowing into the earth to make all of its molecules exist, and it's also feeding biological life and consciousness. So gravity has to be expanded dramatically in terms of what we think it means. So how that applies to what I'm saying now is that in the case of standing stones, you have a device that's actually harnessing the spin field and gravity based on its structure. You build something in the shape of a funnel, and it's actually going to create a vortex-like current in the energy that's flowing into it to make it exist. Now, obviously, at the Raw Spirit Festival, you don't have any big standing stones around you, but...
Well, actually, we do, David.
Oh, cool. Okay, great.
Well, they're not actually long, tall standing, but there's like boulders upon boulders, miles of boulders all behind it I'm looking at right now.
Well, the thing is that ultimately each person functions as a pyramid or a standing stone because you are a spin field generator. You're generating these spin fields in gravity. And that depends on your level of coherence. And so when you get a group of people, especially if they form into a circle, you're actually able to create this energy conduit where you are literally structuring the spin field and gravity, making it spin more effectively. And you're going to be actually reducing earthquake activity, closing ozone holes, creating a massive increase in the yield of crops, and most importantly, opening a portal that will allow for personal and planetary ascension.
Sounds good. I like the sound of that. Hey, you guys here at Raw Spirit Festival like the sound of that? Awesome. Well, Thank you so much for coming on. We're going to shift our conversation off of the main stage of Raw Spirit Festival now. So is there any closing statement you'd like to share about this amazing high-level download that you've just given us all to consider this weekend?
I would say that when you look at the faces of the people around you, recognize that they're all mirrors, they're all reflections of yourself. When you're at a festival like this, you are going to get your buttons pushed. Everybody's going to have some things that will happen to them that are difficult or trying in nature. And I would say
and you're saying that that's because of the nature of the field that's being created?
Yeah. It's really important to recognize that when people are out there trying to pursue bliss, you're going to have obstacles come up. And those are not things that are distractions, and they're not things that should be seen negatively. As you go through this purification process of your own ascension, you are going to deal with wounds that may be frozen in time that happened to you when you were young, that are going to come up in a different way with people now, but they're reenacting things that happened to you earlier in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
And so by blessing and releasing, you're moving through it. So really, if you want to get down to the core of what ascension is about, it's about forgiveness. And in forgiving others, you break the wheel of karma that enables you to forgive yourself. And through that forgiveness and through that acceptance, ultimately you can see that all things that happen in the universe are the way they are. It's all a divine creation. Everything is sacred. And experiences will happen to you in your life until you no longer need them to. So if you get upset by something, if something pisses you off, then the universe says, well, you need it because it's changing your consciousness, creating movement. So only once something doesn't piss you off anymore does it not create movement, and it will then go away. So the key is balancing in forgiveness. Go through that stuff. Learn not to be reactive, emotionally, physically reactive, and you'll be great.
Awesome. What an awesome download. I think your angels have been talking to my angels. I literally was just in Sedona here, and I wrote a book on this very topic that you just described, which will be coming out really soon. I look forward to sharing it with you too, David. Maybe you'd like to take a peek at it before it comes out. And I just want to say thank you so much. This is awesome. And also to everybody here listening at Raw Spirit Festival, we have healers who are here to do just that for people, to hold space for you. There are a lot of people who are doing body work, mental, emotional healing work, and plus, obviously, as David said, the raw foods that are available here will help you up-level your vibration, get back in touch with that one that we all are on this awesome journey home. So in the meantime, let's all forgive each other just right from the start so we can clear up a little bit of that stuff right off the get-go. So I love you. I forgive you. Many blessings to everybody here at Rossbed. Let's give David Wilcock a big hand.
All right. And, of course, vote for me in 2012.
Vote for you in 2012. That's awesome. There's going to be just a little delay switching from off of the stage.
All right.
Thank you. Many blessings to everybody here at Rossbed. Let's give David Wilcock a big hand. Okay, there's everybody clapping for you, David. Had a little delay. Okay. Awesome. Okay, now it's just you and me back here on the phone with the listeners at home, and the opening ceremony has begun at Raw Spirit Festival.
Well, there's a lot of really cool things going on right now, Laura. And
that is indeed true.
There are cool things, very, very amazing things happening in my own career, which I'm on non-disclosure to talk about. But I think it's safe, without going into specifics, I think it's safe to say, and I can get away with saying this much, that I am going to be all over the television, starting in the end of October, beginning of November, and from there on.
Well, that is really good news because, you know, it's just another one of these signs and signals that the culture, the culture which we've been a part of, which has sort of been the underground culture, is now surfacing, and we need it. People need it. The mainstream needs starting to wake up to that reality. So you being all over television will be a great harbinger of this new shift that we're in.
It's
time
really
for
exciting. I mean, the speed with which I had to put together the material that's now going to be seen by so many people was appalling. I mean, I really had to work so hard, and it was just this frenetic, crazy preparation. But I was only discovered right as production was coming to a deadline, and so there were all these different things in the hopper, and I needed to be, shot in a very, very rapid window because everything's going over to editing. So it happened, and I pulled it off, and actually yesterday was when I delivered the bulk of what everybody's going to be seeing. So I'm still kind of recovering from that, but it's
really
incredible. And it's only going to be about a month before whatever I promise people can start to be seen. So really don't have to wait very long.
Nice.
I was just notified yesterday of how soon this is going to start happening, so it was like, oh my God.
That's amazing. That's totally amazing.
Yeah, and like you were saying, it's important that this stuff does become mainstream. It's important that people who have the knowledge that I have are speaking over the television instead of just the same old, same old. Because we need disclosure. We need to have the truth come out. And the truth is that if you stay at the present moment and you go in either direction, into the past or into the future, things get much, much more interesting and fantastic than what life looks for us now. If you go into the past, it gets really interesting and fantastic, and if you look into our future, it gets really interesting and fantastic. And we're in this tiny little smidgen of time where what's happening to us right now appears to be the way it is, and, science has solved all the mysteries, so most people think, it's not that way at all. We have massive, massive breakthroughs in science that are so important that it's like the difference between the Stone Age and what we have now. That's how much our technology is going to change once disclosure happens.
Beautiful. Well, and it feels like it's imminent now. My personal downloads are that, we're to start speaking to each other about disclosure and about the, coming changes and the coming of, the revelation of, so to speak, the fact that we're not alone here in the universe. And we're also to not worship, beings from other places just because they are more advanced from us. They don't
not at all.
On a pedestal. They want us to know we're equals.
I don't know what the etymology of the word gods is, but I would imagine that we've blown it way out of proportion.
Right.
I mean, if you actually go into the Bible, they use the term Elohim, which simply translates literally as mighty ones.
Right.
But the Elohim are clearly visitors. If you look at the word heaven that's used in the Bible, it's actually a mistranslation of two different words, which is shamayim in the Hebrew, and then in the New Testament in the Greek it's uranos. And both of these words actually, when you use translators for other texts, the scholars who really know what these words should translate as, they don't use the word heaven at all. They use the word outer space or universe. And so all of a sudden, if you go back and realize that, the word Elohim is often derived of its plural form, and it's consolidated into the word God in the Bible scriptures, and then the word heaven is actually referring to outer space,
right.
You now have this whole new way in which, in which everything,
our star ancestors who are up in the mothership.
Right. Heaven is not some weird parallel reality that we can't even access unless we die. It's outer space. In my Father's house there are many mansions. I mean, everything starts to make sense.
Yeah,
And,
totally.
you know, in the Law of One, they even go into a cosmic sort of Christianity where God the Father is the universal consciousness, and God the Son is the consciousness of the galaxy, which obviously by design iterates itself into everyone.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah, and the Holy Spirit represents the energy that is suffused through everything in the consciousness of the galaxy and of the universe. So it's like
unified field.
Yeah, so you know, people should realize that, you know, like when you look at the when you look at the Vatican and how they're saying they're going to baptize ETs, it's ridiculous because they're thinking that the Vatican came out recently and said, oh, we'd be happy about disclosure because we'd be able to baptize all these ETs when they come here and turn them to Jesus. But in the cosmic Christianity, the galaxy is the Christ consciousness, and therefore anybody who's been born in the galaxy is already part of that mind, and we don't need to play my God is better than your God.
Yeah,
it becomes
and of course,
a ridiculous exercise.
Jesus is awesome, and he's like, you know, one of us bringing in the download of recognition of being at one with our Heavenly Father, so to speak.
No doubt.
Oneness factor.
So there's a mass awakening happening across the planet now, and it's an awakening that's reaching each person in a different way. And it appears that these are private processes. It appears that people are getting shaken to their core, they're having difficulty, they're having trauma, they're having old wounds come up, they're having all these things happen to them that are distracting and upsetting, and pretty much everybody you know is going through this, and it looks like there's going to be some economic events coming that will further that process to people.
Yeah.
But this is part of the journey. It's part of what we've all signed up for. And most importantly, it's a journey that has a destination. It's not something where you keep going on and getting tormented. It's actually an energetic transformational process that's happening that fundamentally rewrites what it means to be human on the genetic level.
Yeah.
And so all of this stuff that people are going through where they have to dredge up their crap is not just an exercise in, I wish everybody wasn't such a jerk so I could be happier. It's actually, this is what you need to transform yourself. This is precisely what the universe has delivered to you for your own good.
Absolutely. The universe is a giant biofeedback machine.
It certainly is.
But the problem is that people have got that genetically imprinted in their genetic coding and their past lives, and they don't remember or they're not aware of a lot of these things. So that's where some of the confusion comes in. Like, why me? You know? But we just intend for the clearing to happen on all levels.
Well, I try to get people to tailor their perception of going through difficulty, because we have this whole culture that's built around the idea that God is a comforter, right? Which means comforter is like what helps you sleep. God doesn't want you to be asleep. God wants you to wake up. And so he's going to rip the comforter off the bed.
That's awesome. Wow.
So, again, your buttons are going to get pushed. That's what this time is about. And people who follow the kind of material that I'm talking about, and there's a lot of it out there, will typically want to stay in this sort of intellectual headspace where they're just getting all of this access to information that makes them feel high. But then they have all these emotional problems coming up, and they don't want to deal with it. And they say, I don't want to deal with that. You know?
projection is a hard thing to overcome. You know, we have that material come up and then we put it out on the world, but we have to learn to be self-reflective and to, you know, bring in that unified field energy perspective so that we can sort stuff out instead of just pointing fingers at each other.
Absolutely. You can go out and have a binge diet of all kinds of cosmic information and watch YouTube videos all day and read websites and read channeling and read this and read that and try to keep yourself in this state where you're constantly feeling inspired. But you still have to have a job. You still have to pay for your life. You have to feed yourself. You have to have shelter. Even people who live in their car and think that that makes them free are still going to have to go through. If you're going to do that kind of life, you're going to have people tell you to get up and go in the middle of the night. Cops are going to show up because you don't really have the right to be doing what you want to do. You still have to have food. You still have to, you know, live. And so there are people who do what you call couch surfing, where they're, you know, just thinking that they can live with others. And actually what you're going to find is that you're paying more for that life than you would pay to have a job and just stabilize your income. And also because of the amount of awakening that's happening, there is literally a new gold rush like never before in terms of all the different healing professions that people can get into if you want to be self-employed.
Absolutely.
And if you're self-employed, you may rise and fall.
There's going to be millions of them waking up needing this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to, look, we appear to be right on the threshold of some very significant disclosure. And the TV work that I've done is part of that. It's a very good part of that. So the point that I'm trying to make today is that as you go through a personal transformation in yourself, you may want to dedicate your life to healing and helping others. And you may feel that the job that you have is not doing that. But again, everybody's job involves working with other people. Everybody's job involves helping people in some way. And we need people in those jobs who have a positive attitude, who are loving, who are supportive, who are spiritually awakened, regardless of whether you work at the library or whether you work at the gas station or whether you work as a waiter in a restaurant. All of those different professions involve connecting with people and sharing that consciousness that you've adopted, which doesn't even involve indoctrinating them with any information as much as it's just the vibration that you give off by your presence and by your awareness that all is well.
Absolutely beautifully said.
Well, thank you.
Yes, that's
so
important. That really gives people validation that they don't have to they don't have to go off and do something extreme. I'll just start living the principles in the life that you have now.
Well, it's also important to remember that this is like final exams. We're at the very, very, very end of the old way of doing things. There are incredibly redundant prophecies, both from inside whistleblowers from India, from China, from the U.S., saying that one of the main levels of this 2012 prophecy is that somewhere around that time, and it could be earlier, it could be next year, might even be this year, who knows, but at some point, there is this official tipping point where the ETs who seem to have withdrawn since the times of the Old Testament for the most part now come back, because in the Old Testament they were called Elohim or angels, you know, but they come back, and when they come back, there is some sort of energetic download that everybody gets regardless of how much asleep you might be. And it's as if there is a genetic trigger that goes off in your body where now you're able to remember things that you didn't know before.
Yeah, the code.
And it's not like the whole world is magically transformed by this. That's another important point. It's if you think back to how almost everybody in the alternative and healing communities were really supportive of Obama being elected to be president. Of course, there was a lot of conspiracy and hate out there too. A fairly good number of these people really saw that as a progressive step. And yet what you've seen since then is that business as usual has kind of continued. And the changes that Obama has tried to make, while many of them are significant, they're changes that seem to be a day late and a dollar short based on the scope of global problems that we have. And so there was this immediate sense when he was inaugurated that, like, wow, this is the moment when, like, everything changes and I'm going to have more money and I'm not going to have to worry about anything anymore and everything's going to be wonderful. And it didn't actually happen that way. So I think that the change that's happening on the earth is a change that we need to foment ourselves through our own work and our own effort. And even when we make contact with extraterrestrials, it's not necessarily going to be a situation where they just suddenly show up and solve all our problems.
Right.
It could be that, like, we realize, wow, we're not alone. Okay, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to heal the planet? And I like to look at all different scenarios for 2012, believe me. I mean, there are some scenarios where there's this energetic trigger that goes off and everybody goes through some sort of Stargate and the world is transformed into a Garden of Eden type of new paradise. That could be what happens. It could be that some people have that happen and it's an elective process depending on whether you're ready for it. And it may be that some people will be ready for it as soon as the shift happens. Yeah, but on the other hand, we really don't know what it's going to be until it happens. And because of the elusive nature of psychic guidance, you can get intuitive guidance that seems totally right, and you can have 75% of it be right, and then the other 25% you find out it was like a leprechaun wish, and it's different than what you thought it was. So as a responsible person, I have to also see that there could be a world that pretty much stays the way it is, and that the prophecies are meant to inspire us, but that it's going to be a lot more physical of a change that we induce than what some people might be expecting. So I have to prepare for both and act as if either one could happen.
There you go. That sounds appropriate. And I'm actually standing here with Jay Puano, who you met in Planet Raw the other day.
No, like a month ago.
A month ago. He has a question for you.
Hey, David. I came up to you at Planet Raw about a month ago, and just recently at Burning Man, I definitely went over to the other side and hung out with a bunch of the community there, and downloaded my energy suit, and one of my parts of my path is to be a bridge to the 5th and 6th dimensions, and they were all just excited, and it seems like it's more of an initiation phase where we're going to have a direct galactic contact, and not necessarily everyone, but we'll be able to bring more of those downloads to a higher, almost like a quickening, you know what I mean? So I don't know on the physical how it's going to necessarily result in years on the 3D, but I definitely was associating with them and discussing and jumping in, and they were excited that I was able to jump in, and we would talk and we would move around, and they had the complete, the playa was 2 different exact realities, except theirs was on, exactly what you were explaining before, and they were giving me an energy suit to be able to create those waveforms more. So right now I'm just trying to embody that with my daily practices, my diet and whatnot. But in time, I think by that 2012 shift, or before and after, give or take, how time works, we're going to have that more open communication, and there might even be a way to I don't know, but it was just a very powerful download, and it's completely in line with everything that you've discussed.
Well, thank you for that statement. That's great. It's important to understand that if you do the work, if you get in there and get your homework done, massive changes can happen in your life that will include mystical experiences that even as few as 10, 15 years ago, would launch somebody's career writing books and going on the internet and being on radio shows. And it's happening to so many people now that it's astonishing. I mean, the number of emails that I'm getting of people having completely paradigm-busting experiences is astonishing. And again, you have control over whether this is going to happen and how rapidly it's going to happen. And on a very intrinsic level, so much of it has to do with the emotional clearing work.
Yeah.
If you don't deal with your emotions, you're not going to have the guardian at the threshold sated. So what you're describing, the guardian at the threshold is this archetype that is dealing with the idea that your shadow self, meaning all the parts of yourself that you haven't forgiven and accepted, becomes projected as some sort of shadow entity, some sort of negative entity. And that negative entity will appear in your dreams as various villain forces. They could be in any number of guises, including guises of people that you know, or even yourself in some cases. But the point is, you have these adversarial interactions in dreams. You have people that are opposing you, that say mean things to you, that do nasty things, that are, in some cases, monstrous and violent. Those meetings that you have in dreams are meetings with this part of yourself that is fragmented, that hasn't healed and hasn't become part of your total mind. And the key is all this work that some people want to just completely avoid in their regular life.
Yeah.
They don't want to deal with pain. They don't want to deal with emotional upset. They don't want to look at stuff that's uncomfortable. But that's the trick, because the guardian of the threshold, the embodiment of your shadow self, is what you have to get through to go through the door that opens yourself to higher consciousness. So in the ancient tradition, long, long ago I'm talking now, they really focused on initiation. Initiation was a very rapid and almost brutal way to get past the guardian at the threshold, because literally what initiation does is it crushes your ego.
Right.
So you look at like stories from Tibet and stories of these lamas and these yogis and these gurus, and they kick your ass.
Well, there's a Native American shamanic lineage where they would literally bury the person, the initiate, in the ground up to their head, and everybody from the community would come and pee and spit on them.
Oh, wow.
You know, that kind of thing, to just totally ego stop, busted, humility in place.
Right. I mean, and all the time that this is happening to you, your ego is going to be going, oh my God, this is so unfair, this is so wrong, I'm such a victim, they're jerks, and how could they do this to me, and this is outrageous, and I should have never done this, what the hell was I thinking? And all of this stuff is going to happen, and yet you're tortured, and it keeps on happening, but the people who are torturing you know that they're doing it for your higher good.
Yeah.
And this has gotten horribly distorted. This has gotten horribly distorted.
It's happening in our life all the time. I mean,
well, that's what I'm trying to say. But
realize, yeah.
It's happening in our lives already, but when I say horribly distorted, what I mean is that since this is the most rapid way to grow, the secret societies embodied that. Like if you look at Masonic order, even when you go through the first, even when you go through the first degree Mason initiation, they actually put this sword to your chest and make you think you're about to get stabbed through the heart. And more recently now they use a gun. In fact, there was a case in the media that came out last year where somebody actually did get shot in a Masonic ritual where you're threatened as if you're going to be killed. So, again, the idea is that initiation in its traditional form was administered compassionately. It's gotten grossly distorted and turned into this idea where these people feel that by fomenting chaos in the world, that they're actually helping people grow. And on one level, that is true. Initiation of the world is happening now. There's a lot of bad things that are happening, bad in terms of what the body thinks is bad, because it doesn't make the body comfortable. But the body consciousness is the ego. And so there is a way in which these ancient rites would actually lead to you transcending your physical state. You would actually go out of body. Like when you're describing, Laura, the idea of Native American initiation where you're buried alive and people are peeing on your face, what's going to happen sooner or later is that you're going to dissociate from your body. You're going to pop out.
Right.
And because it's so awful and so uncomfortable that then you make this gap, this bridge. And another one, of course, would be the Sundance, right?
Right.
People voluntarily tying skewers through their muscles and hanging themselves off of strings and just hanging there until you basically almost die. There's Siberian shamans who literally hack themselves up with an axe. They chop their legs with an axe. And it's crazy. And I'm not saying, please, don't anybody do this. Because the point is the world is doing it to you.
Right.
Your life is the initiation. If you want a shamanic initiation, you know, there's another one in the Lakota tradition where you literally run into a tree with your head. And you know, it's like you're imitating the buffalo ramming his head into a tree. Yeah. And so you don't need to traumatize yourself. You don't need to wound yourself because, again, your life is doing that for you. That's why there's earth changes. That's why there's economic upheavals. That's why the government is starting to be unmasked as this diabolical entity behind all the things that are superficially seen as being positive. All of those transformative processes that are happening to us are part of this disemboweling of the ego that's happening, where it's literally being ripped to pieces. Everybody's idea of get a job, work it for 30 years, retire nicely, all that went out the window. Nobody gets to be secure about anything. There's uncertainty. You can't just have an easy life. You have to live in the moment. Yeah, you can't just sit there and trust the electronic babysitter to never lead you wrong, the television, right? The life that people had seemed like it was comfortable. You get a job, you have 2.5 children, white picket fence, SUV in the driveway, everything's hunky-dory, but it's not that way. You don't know what's going to happen. You know, we had an economic collapse in 2008 where everybody's money, if they had any assets, was basically chopped in half. It happened to my family too, and we're still dealing with the repercussions of that. So these times are really hitting your buttons. They're pushing you. And to embrace that transformation is to ultimately move into a state where, remember now, the ego is not the entirety of your identity that you consciously think with. I think there's a massive, massive misunderstanding that's happened where when people look at Tibetan meditation and all that kind of stuff, they say, wow, if I want to be a great meditator, then I need to have no thoughts at all. Anything that I think with, my whole identity is my enemy. I do not want any consciousness. Well, that's ludicrous. People have lost touch with what the idea of transcending the ego is really about, because you're still going to have a thinking, reasoning mind once you've transcended your ego. Really, to get more precise about it, the ego is that which does not forgive. And that's really all that it is. It doesn't forgive yourself, and it doesn't forgive others. Thank you.
There you go. I want to put that on Twitter right now.
So when you move into a state of forgiveness, you're no longer operating from ego. Because when you're operating in body consciousness, the body won't forgive. The body won't forgive the things that insult the body. But when you move into a higher consciousness, you realize that what's good for others is good for you. And you're able to see that the experiences that come your way, regardless of how strenuous and terrible they may seem, regardless of how much they may have put you through something, are ultimately positive. And I'll give you an example from my own case. I have 2 veneers in the front of my mouth. My eye teeth are capped with veneers because originally my father was exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam, which is a very toxic chemical, and I was missing teeth that didn't come in as an adult. So I would have had these little fangs next to my front teeth if I hadn't had veneers put in. So I had some situations, without going into any detail, I had some situations where there was a particular small group of people who had gotten me very upset, and I was having some unpleasant thoughts, and while I was having these thoughts, I bit down on my fork while I was eating a salad, and my veneer just frickin' shattered. I mean, it's crazy to have. I've never had anything like this where your tooth just goes crunch and goes into 3 different pieces. And they didn't fall out because they were still cemented in. But you know, I went and looked in the mirror and it was painful. And there's these chunks. You know, I could see the cracks. And if you hit it with your finger, they were just flapping. So thankfully, I was able to go to the dentist right away. But you know, now some people, if this kind of thing would happen to them, if they're not enlightened or they're not on an enlightenment journey, they're gonna start swearing and they're gonna play all this victim stuff, and they might even want to blame their dentist and say, well, he should have done da 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 da, and why didn't he da da da? Well, the fact is, porcelain is a very fragile thing, and it's like glass, and so if you hit it wrong, that can happen. And I just happened to hit it wrong. But I'm not stupid, and I don't ever discount the fact that the thoughts that were going through my mind right before my tooth shattered were eminently related to why it shattered.
Yeah, there you
because
go.
I was thinking unloving thoughts. And so that little tooth explosion is an example of the universe saying, David, you know, you're talking to a lot of people, and you're going to be talking to even more in the future. We need you to live by what you're saying. When you're not living by what you're saying,
Quicker way to realize that.
it's I call it the glass ceiling. Our lives are being observed by everybody out there in the universe. Privacy is a ridiculous idea. It's completely ridiculous. It's an illusion created by the body conscious ego mind, and that's it. Because the bad guys can see everything you're thinking, and the good guys can see everything you're thinking. And if you get into what the law of one system says, negative entities will strengthen the manifestation potential of any negative thoughts that you have, but only up to the level that you've invited it. And positive entities will strengthen any positive potential of thoughts that you have on a positive direction. So the negative entities, it's very strange, but they're doing all this stuff, and they're thinking that they're behaving in free will, and they have goals. They're striving to reach their aims, but they're never allowed to do more than they do. And what they do is only what they're allowed to do by invitation, and we control that. So in the law of one, it all...
we're going to recognize each other's thoughts and feelings more and more too. I mean, it's already starting to happen, you know.
Oh yeah. Look at how much blood has been shed over nationalism and religion.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that basically is everything right there, other than racism. You know, you pretty much have now defined where everybody is coming from. I mean, you look at the Spanish conquerors, and the idea that this mass murder could be accomplished and seen as a positive, only came about because they didn't understand the culture of the sacrifices that were going on, which admittedly was negative. But if somebody's coming in and they're doing human sacrifices and you find a culture that's doing that, the solution to that is not genocide.
Yeah, Jay was just mentioning the whole, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven.
On earth as it is in heaven. Please forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And it's just about forgiveness. Through forgiveness, we can bridge and bring the kingdom of heaven, the shift is we're going to bring this galactic culture and bridge and live as it is in heaven, meaning that we'll just be aware that there's more out there.
And we'll be more awakened as our galactic brethren.
Right. And remember, the word heaven is a mistranslation of the Hebrew word shamayim, which actually means outer space.
Outer space.
Exactly.
So it was all right there right from the beginning. We just had these flowery words on it that made us believe in some kind of mythology that we're now able to debunk step by step by step, but still retain the jewels of that wisdom.
There are humans everywhere. I was actually talking with one of my most highly positioned insiders just the other night. And these guys are funny because, like, sometimes they'll talk and sometimes they won't. And you have to remember what they say because you can get so much of a download in one call. But I finally started asking the right kind of questions. And one of the things that I found out was that even within like 20 to 30 light years from the Earth, which is not really very far at all, that's some of the closest stars, we actually do have inhabited planetary systems. If you go out to 100 light years, you have, over 100 different inhabited worlds just at that range. And if you go out into 1,000 light year radius from us, I believe, and I have to go back and review my notes, but I believe he said that at 1,000 light year radius, we're literally looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 to 8,000 inhabited planets with humans on them. Now that's crazy, but that's what's actually going on. We are so much not alone, and there are many, many planets that are in various stages of development that have not reached the level of space travel. They have not achieved even the levels that we have. And for the most part, they're left alone. They're not dealt with, they're not tampered with until they reach a certain point. Apparently, our planet, what makes our planet so unique is that we have incredible biodiversity. In many of these other planets, you might have 500,000 different types of creature on that planet, between insects, plants, animals, birds, fish, etc. But on the Earth, we have tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of different species. And this has allowed, apparently, this is one of the things he was just telling me, many ETs have come here and brought various species from their own planet in order to make it more interesting for us. And that's also why we have so much fascination and interest in the Earth, because all these other ETs can come here and they can live here because the biodiversity of the genetic waveforms in the Earth supports a huge conglomeration of different extraterrestrial life on this planet.
Wow,
so we
David.
actually do. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, wow, I want to get into this conversation with you more deeply. Would you be willing to come back on the show again to do that, to continue this thread here? It's all really fascinating.
I'm sure we can set that up, yeah. My schedule is pretty nutty right now, but I'm certainly willing to do shows where I can. So, yeah.
Well, we'll trust in the divine flow here, and just have a couple minutes left on the show. And I wanted to say, I wanted to give a big shout out to Joy and Rebecca and everybody who's coming to Epic Eden Hot Springs, and I understand that you'll be joining us there.
You're damn right about that. I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be awesome. So everybody, if you've been feeling like you want to go to Epic Eden you know, this is the kind of conversation that we'll get to have on a regular basis here with David and just all enjoy each other. So totally come on out for Epic Eden Hot Springs and go to epicedenhotsprings.com to check that out. And you can hear the beauty of the Raw Spirit Festival starting here in Prescott, Arizona. And so at the close of the show here, I just want to also to give out a big shout out to one of the show's sponsors, the main show sponsor, Health Force Nutritionals. Dr. Sheridan and his whole crew bring in some of this high vibrational nutrition that David's been talking about or indicating that's available to us. And I'm going to have to ask him now about the micro clustering that you were mentioning earlier and how that relates to the foods that are in the vitamin green and earth and all these.
I'll get into that at Eden Hot Springs in detail. That will all be covered.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, any last comments you'd like to make today to wrap out the show, David?
Well, I'd like to also say that I'm going to be appearing in Tempe, Arizona in November with William Henry, and that's going to be an intense download on the Founding Fathers and the knowledge that they had about the process of ascension. I have an event coming up in Miami in February that we just announced on my website. And that's going to be the latest, greatest cosmic downloads. Everybody who goes to see that, it's 16 hours of lecture material, which is a tremendous wealth. I go into detail about how to access your higher self and give you the practices to do that, how to analyze your dreams. I also perform live music. There's going to be 9 different vocal songs that I'm singing with a band, and people really love the music. So the book is not coming out until April or May of next year. People ask me how my movie is coming. That's going to be probably not until the year 2012 based on how things are looking, but there's very, very interesting and wonderful progress that we're making on that front. So I'm out there. As far as the television debuts, it's going to start at the end of October, and it will kick in even more in November. I can't say what it is yet, but it's going to really be awesome once you see it, and everybody will be able to watch it. So there's a lot more to come.
Right on. Beautiful. And everybody go to divinecosmos.com, subscribe to David's blog, and just keep up to date with all this awesome stuff. All right, Raw Spirit Festival, you guys want to say goodbye to David? Awesome, David. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Great.